So, Jack, this week we could see another government shutdown. And in previous years, we've seen Congress and political parties use the threat of a government shutdown as a bargaining chip in negotiations. Is this year any different, or is this kind of the same old back and forth?
You're exactly right that it is a bargaining chip. Traditionally, we face shutdowns or at least threats of shutdowns when there's divided government, when Congress is controlled by the Republicans and there's a Democratic president, or vice versa, or when one house of Congress is controlled by each party. And so there's problems negotiating and there's disagreements. The thing that makes this different is that the Republicans control both houses of Congress and there's a Republican president. There was one shutdown with unified government, and that was the last time Donald Trump was president and the Republicans controlled Congress in 2018. And what was interesting then was that the president disagreed with the Republican leadership in Congress over funding, particularly for the border wall and some defense funding. It's not typical that when there's these high stakes political battles that a political party in control of the entire federal government can't agree with itself. It may be the case that Republicans can sort of push this through with their control, but this is unusual in the sense that we are not in an era of divided government right now, and we're facing something that we typically only face during an era of divided government. It's worth noting that the longest shutdown in history was the Trump Republican shutdown of 2018, 2019.
No, we'll have to see if we see another one. But I know that the a continuing resolution that would keep the government partially funded is that passed a version of it passed the House today on Tuesday. And from what you can tell so far, what are the local potential impacts from that bill?
The one of the things that was included in this that changes this continuing resolution from the budget resolution that was passed earlier in the month is they eliminated earmark spending, which it's now been redubbed community project funding to make it sound less like it's just pet projects, but it's essentially pet projects. Were about $15 billion in these local projects. I don't know how much of that would have gone to Oregon, but those have been stripped out of the continuing resolution. So there will be less new funding for new programs. However, the continuing resolution continues last year's, with the exception of an increase in defense spending and a cut for the District of Columbia. It just basically passes along last year's spending. So things that are federal money that's coming into Oregon already will continue coming into Oregon. It's just that new projects will not be initiated. And it's not 15 billion across the nation is not that much. So we're not going to suffer that much if this does pass in terms of a decrease in what Oregon would get otherwise.
You pointed out to the fact that Republicans, although they control or they have a majority, it's very close and it's always kind of right down the middle in terms of how these votes have turned out. What do you think the chances of this continuing resolution passing in the Senate are at this moment?
In this, the budget resolution obeys different rules than a continuing resolution. There's kind of there's some insider baseball parliamentarian rules that are funky in Congress. The budget resolution only requires a bare majority in the Senate. A continuing resolution requires the bill to be passed by a filibuster-proof majority of 60. So with the Republicans having 53 senators, they need at least seven Democratic votes to pass it. Rand Paul has said he's going to vote against it, so they actually will need 8 votes to pass this. So interestingly, right now, the Senate Democrats are in the position of having to decide whether they're going to assist the Republican Party in their pretty partisan continuing resolution, or whether they're going to risk then being the ones who take the blame for the shutdown. And of course, shutdowns, one of the things that is true about all shutdowns, whenever they occur since the 90s, is it's a blame game. Both sides are going to say it was your shutdown. Democrats are in a pretty good position right now to say you control all the levers of power in Washington, D.C., it's your shutdown. But because Democratic votes could deny the filibuster-proof majority, there will be some susceptibility. So there are a lot of conversations happening in DC right now, I would imagine, among Democratic leaders as to whether they want to capitulate, which is what it would be if they voted for it, or whether they want to risk being blamed on the shutdown. So it's always tricky for both parties because nobody does know who the American people are going to ultimately blame.
It's a bit of a game of PR after any situation like this.
Absolutely. I mean, politics is 90% PR and 10% substance. And the substance does matter. Like, but federal budgets it's a $1.7 trillion spending bill. So that's a lot of money. A lot of stuff goes on. So the 10% substance is important, but we see here, from the point of view of the public and from the media, we see the performance. And politicians are definitely aware of the performative aspect of this.